Hello to all of our listeners out there in podcast land, and welcome to episode 15 of the Canadian Patriot podcast, recorded on February 15th, 2016. This evening, I'm being joined by Edward Osborne, who writes and shoots video as part of his site TVPressPass, focusing on the Canadian firearms industry. As always, I'm your host, Andrew. I'm a libertarian, competitive shooter, gear reviewer at everydaytactical.com, and gun club director. Edward, thank you for being on the show this evening.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Andrew.
No, you were actually one of the first folks that we got feedback about. Get this guy on the show. We want to hear what he has to say. And then, months later, we finally got an episode with you on.
Well, and it's one of those things. It's, oh yeah, we should do this. We should definitely do this. It sounds like a great idea. When have we got time to do this, right? And
Yeah,
there's lots of that in
absolutely.
my life, I tell you. And so it's glad that we finally got the stars aligned, and pleased to be here.
I'm happy to have you on, sir. For our listeners, we'd like to hear your feedback about the show. If you want to have somebody like Edward or not Edward back on again, you can email the show feedback at CanadianPatriotPodcast.com or our feedback panel through the website, CanadianPatriotPodcast.com/feedback. We're also available on Stitcher and iTunes. Links, as always, are in the show notes. So we'll actually start with, what are we drinking? Edward, I don't know if you know this. This is a drinking show.
Yes, I did. I was prepared, I thought. One of my other podcasts I listen to is War on the Rocks, and they're a company out of the US, and they do a bunch of strategic defense stuff, and they always do a What Are We Drinking? So I've got a vermouth panache, which is 2 parts white vermouth, 1 part red vermouth, and a little bit of bitters in there.
That sounds pretty damn tasty.
It is. It's great. It's a nice sipping drink.
I like that. I've got more homebrew this week. We're on to some red ale.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, it's important to have more than one hobby. So I play with guns and make a podcast and drink.
Hopefully not quite all at the same time, but almost at the same time.
You sometimes 2 out of 3, but not always.
There you go. There you go.
All right. And today is fairly important in Canadian history. Today is February 15th, which means it's Flag Day. So for our listeners that don't know, our national flag was raised for the first time at Parliament Hill in February 15, 1965. So every year, February 15th, we have observance of Flag Day. There are Flag Day ceremonies in Ottawa. Some of the provinces, such as my lovely home province of Ontario, have other weird and exciting holidays like Family Day.
Yes, that's an Alberta thing too. We did have Family Day today.
So is that a holiday for you then?
Oh yeah, yeah. I took my dad out and had him shoot 22 long rifle for the first time since he was probably 15 or something like that, and set off a couple of binary targets. And the woods were definitely full of people who were out taking holiday today.
That's pretty cool. We get the day off work in Ontario as well. I think that's true in most provinces. I don't think any province really celebrates Flag Day anymore, although it is our federal holiday. Not that it's a day off for everybody.
Yeah, I don't think it's a statutory holiday by any means.
And fun fact, I don't know, exciting history. For the folks that don't know how our flag came into being, it's one of 3 finalist choices to replace the Union flag. This particular design that we have now, the single maple leaf with the 2 red bars on a white field, was developed by George Stanley, who was, I want to say, the arts director at RMC. He was a faculty director at RMC, the Royal Military College in Kingston, and our national flag is actually based on the Royal Military College flag, which is a white field with 2 red bars and the RMC crest in the middle instead of the flag. So it's a gauntleted hand.
Yeah, isn't that the classic Heritage Minutes video? That was a big thing for me back in the 90s when they'd run those sort of 60 seconds of Canadian history. I'm pretty sure the flag one was one of the most popular of those.
Oh, I didn't even know that. I'm just going off of, show notes.
If you haven't seen the Heritage Minutes stuff, you should. They're very, very Canadian, and they're very they're a little bit weird and funny. They do ones about, the origin of Winnie the Pooh and the origin of Superman, and
Yeah, I've seen some of those. I can't say I recall seeing one about the flag.
yeah, the flag one's quite odd because whoever maybe it is supposed to be George Stanley. No, I think it's supposed to be Lester B. Pearson. They have an actor playing Lester B. Pearson, and he addresses the camera directly, talking about flag options and what they're going to pick. It's it's interesting.
All right. Well, see if I can find that. We'll put it in the show notes. Give everybody a link. So we've kind of touched on who you are and what you do. Edward, can you give our listeners, for the people that weren't the ones that requested, can we have TV Press Pass on the podcast? Who you
Yeah,
are, what you do, what is TV Press Pass?
yeah. Oh God, and where did that name come from? It's been years now. I can't remember. So my starting in the shooting sports began when I was really, really young. When I was in high school, I was a trap kid on the local shotgun field and had a really good time with that, being outdoors and getting to hang around guns and that kind of thing. And when I went to school for journalism and got my bachelor's degree in that. And part of that process, you're supposed to do various internships. Um, and the expectation is sort of you go to small town Alberta and you cover the mayoral election and children's hockey and that kind of thing. You can do that for 2 or 3 years, and then you move to newspapers and all this other kind of stuff. And I sort of thought I wasn't really keen on following that path. I kind of wanted to do more outdoorsy kind of stuff, and I had a part-time job at Wholesale Sports at the time. And so my internship, me and a couple other buddies made a print magazine that we ran, I think, 5,000 issues of, that was guns, video games, and automotive gear. So I was responsible for the guns portion of it. And since then, I've been hopefully growing beyond that and doing a lot more as far as coverage of online stuff. The big thing for me was when I bought a Tavor rifle back in, I'm going to say 2009, and I'm pretty sure 2009 is the right answer. Um, when I bought that rifle, was trying to figure out if it was a good deal, if it was a good rifle to buy, and if it was a reasonable purchase. And everything that I looked up online was all airsoft, because at that point the rifle wasn't very popular in Canada and didn't exist at all in the United States. Um, and so I sort of bought it on a whim and decided that I was going to start making content so that the next person who wanted to buy that rifle, when they went and looked for it and tried to find some information, there would be some there. And then since then, I've been doing all kinds of different things. So TV Press Pass is my personal blog, but I also write online for the Firearms blog and for Outdoor Hub. And then I've done print publications in Caliber magazine and the Canadian Firearms Journal. What else am I doing? I shoot YouTube stuff, which I have a great time doing. Oh, and I just started a podcast, which is really not my baby necessarily, but it's a partnership with Kate from Ammo Supply. And really, I've been buying stuff from her for a year or two at least. And every time I'm in there, we talk a bunch and thought, we should record some of these and put them up. We did a rundown of the election when it was happening, as far as where the different parties rested on their different platforms. I think that's about it. That covers a bunch of the media stuff I've done.
Keeps you pretty busy, I would imagine.
Yeah,
I
it
didn't
does
realize that you
actually.
actually had a background in journalism. I
Yeah.
figured you're like me. You're a guy with an internet connection and a computer, and I've been reading. Geez, I don't know. How long has TV Press Pass been around? It's got to be like 5 or 6 years.
Well, and that's the thing. I'm trying to figure out when I sort of started, because I've been writing stuff on and off. The big thing that really sort of formalized it for me, I don't know, probably the reclass. Well, no, the reclassification was the first time that I got leaked stuff submitted to me. That was a big thing. But I was writing things before that. Um, Pretty much as long as I've been shooting guns, I've been interested in talking about guns with people, and writing that stuff down came pretty naturally to me.
That's pretty cool. We don't, or at least I don't see that we have a lot of firearms journalism in this country. I mean, we get a couple of people. We get some regular folks that write for like Caliber.
Hmm.
We've got some people that regularly are on Gun Nuts. Like you'll see people that go to SHOT Show and they talk about what they see. But aside from TV Press Pass, I don't see a lot of Canadian driven content that has that. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call it that professional level of detail.
Well, I guess thank you. There's definitely some really good stuff out there that beyond what I do. But I gotta pretend that I spent all that money on a and 5 years in school for a reason. So I'll say thank you. It's nice to do. I mean, uh, part of the reason that I started doing this stuff is when I was looking online, like I say, there was lots of airsoft stuff, and that was about it. And I sort of went, oh, there's a gap there. And there's a
Mhm.
lot more now than there was when I was starting. But I mean, if you look around, there's still Funker, right? Funker Tactical is a huge, they're more combat footage focused, but they're a Canadian company and they do some great, very high end stuff.
Yeah, I do really enjoy the YouTube videos they produce, but their written content is certainly not there.
And that was really an emphasis for us going to school, right? We were essentially there, and the professors are saying newspapers are dying. That time is, you're not going to have a 30-year job writing in a newspaper. So you need to be able to shoot photos, you need to be able to shoot video, you need to be able to record a podcast and write articles. Like they were very whatever medium you can get your fingers into, that's the one you should be able to like you should be able to do all of them. So
Mhm.
I've tried to do that. I've tried to maintain as much diversity as I can as far as what I can and can't produce.
Do you figure you get a lot of the same audience, like the same people watch the videos as listen to the podcast as read the articles, or do you? I don't know how detailed your metrics are. Like I can see who watches our YouTube videos live on Monday nights is different than the group of people that downloads the edited show and listens to us on Wednesdays.
I think there is some overlap, but I know that specifically when I'm publishing through other places, right? When somebody picks up Caliber, they're not reading TV Press Pass, they're reading Caliber, right?
Sure.
And I'm lucky to have an article in there, right? The people who follow the blog definitely follow my YouTube. I think there's a real overlap there. Um, but some of the other places, like it's funny, I'll post on CGN on a pretty regular basis, and every now and then somebody will be like, "Oh, I had no idea you had a blog and all these videos and that kind of thing." I'm like, "Yep, been doing it for a while. It's out there." But um, I mean, it's interesting because the Canadian firearms community is really big. I think it's way bigger than any of us really realize, but it's also not very connected compared to a lot of communities out there, right? There's lots of guys who just go to their range and shoot their club, or have their own niche around the country. Um, and I think things like uh, podcasting and national magazines and that kind of thing bring us closer and definitely sort of help share some of that information and community around. But I think there is lots still that are relatively unknown.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, 3 million people, and seems everywhere you go, it's the same couple of thousand. Does
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. You got 3 million registered owners with licenses, and then you've got a couple of thousand of real enthusiasts who are interested in the media side of it and across the metrics. Yeah, that's a
I
really good
mean,
way to put it.
that's the impression I get because it's always the same. It doesn't matter whose YouTube channel you look at or whose podcast you listen to or what Facebook group you're following. Like it always seems to be the same couple of thousand names popping up.
Well, and I think that's probably true for a lot of hobby and enthusiast kind of industries, right? That depending on what it is, you've got people who are, interested, right? And I've met those guys at parties where they'll tell you how excited they are to get their PAL and their restricted license, and then they'll go on to tell you how awesome Canada's gun laws are because they're keep us safe and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, whoa, right? I forgot you kind of people existed, that you're in there, right? And you are a shooter, but you're not politically active or legally what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody who goes through the law and really is interested in learning and caring about the law.
Yeah, sort of that scholarly aspect of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, that there is a huge group of people who are just having a good time, right? There's nothing wrong with that either. It's just it would be nice if we were all on the same page on some of this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we didn't really cover it this week, but the last couple of weeks, as part of our intro segment, we talk about a couple of petitions. And I didn't look today because I wasn't planning on talking about it in our rundown like we normally do. But the petition to change the restriction of the AR-15 has been like at 19,000 and change signatures for like a month,
Yeah.
right? Like 4 episodes in a row for me. And it's like it's at 19,000, and I don't know. I looked at it the other day, and it was like 19,980 or something. Like it was very close, but it still didn't hit that 20,000.
Yeah, at that point, you got to, whoever's running that petition needs to start finding some other places, right? Because yeah, you've got your full saturation from the people, the 20,000 people who really care and are really into it and enjoy their AR-15s. Awesome. Now you got to find like a gun show that's like the Calgary Gun Show. Do you have an Easter gun show out there where just everybody shows up for miles around? People without licenses and just trucks with camo on them come by to look at stuff.
You know, I haven't really done the gun show circuit in Southern Ontario in a couple of years. I did it when I first got into the shooting sports to see what it was all about, and it seemed to me that the gun shows here are all run by the same people, and it's the same vendors selling the same stuff, and it wasn't a remarkably good deal for any of the things that I'm interested in buying, because especially someone that's in, like, my background is competitive and tactical shooting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to go look at one of 600 Mausers that are the same 600 Mausers that are on the table every weekend.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. And I mean, one of the things I really like about some of the larger Calgary gun shows is you get a blend. It's only like, I think it's $70 to get a table. So you get lots of, Wolverine Supplies will come out from Manitoba and they'll have a bunch of brand new XCRs there to sell. But you'll also have anybody who's got a collection of whatever, right? And so sometimes that's a bunch of Mausers, or sometimes that's some interesting militaria, or sometimes that's a bunch of really nice guns that they just happen to have, and they're going to show them, and maybe they're going to sell a couple of them. I'm actually pretty excited for the Calgary show this year,
And
because it does bring a totally different group of people into the firearms world.
you said that normally happens on Easter. Is that like on Easter Saturday then?
Easter Saturday, Sunday, at
Oh,
the
so it's the
Roundup
Holy.
Center,
Okay,
if
we'll see if
anybody's
we can
in
post a
Calgary.
link to that in the show notes. Yeah, for anybody in, what do you say is a reasonable drive in Alberta? Like 2 hours, 3 hours to go to that?
Oh yeah, we get people who come from like Peace River to go to that, and that's like 8 hours. But those
Wow.
guys they're the dedicated guys.
Yeah, no kidding. What's the entry fee for something like that?
Um, Let me see. Children and ladies get in free, and I'm pretty sure it's $10 in the door. And they run Saturday, Sunday. If we're talking names here, the people who put it on are the Alberta Arms and Cartridge Collectors Association.
Okay, I'll dig up a link to put in the show notes for anybody in Alberta that wants to make the drive into Calgary Easter weekend. That sounds like it's going to be far larger, a far better put together show than anything that I've seen in Southern Ontario.
Oh, they fill a stadium for sure. Like, well, it's not a stadium; it's their roundup center. But yeah, it's a couple of hundred booths and something like, I want to say 5 to 15,000 people, something like that.
Yeah, that's that's quite a bit bigger than any of the gun shows I've been to.
Yeah, it's a good time for sure, for sure.
Oh, that sounds like a good deal. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Um, Now, you're going to that then? Are you just
Yeah,
going to walk around, or are you planning on doing anything else while you're there?
actually, I'm gonna have a table there this year. So I said to Kate that I'd help her out because she runs ammo supply and sells a bunch of ammunition that weekend. But the other thing that I've been doing sort of on the side for the past, let's say 9 months, is I've been working on developing and selling some rifles with Zahal.org, and they're an Israeli company. Um, but they sell a bunch of stuff to Canada and they ship a bunch of stuff to Canada, and they do aftermarket stocks and magazines and muzzle devices and that kind of thing. Um, and they were sort of talking. They said, we should start selling some guns in Canada, just a couple for it, but we don't want to sell the same uh, off the rack gun. We want to build something. So I've spent probably a couple of months talking with them about what I like about my Tavor and what I've done to my Tavor and changed, and what is a good change and what is a bad change for the Tavor, because there are bad changes. Um, and so I believe that they're hoping to have a couple of rifles ready to sell at that show. That's the plan, anyways.
That would be very cool. I'd like to see what that turns into.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun. I mean, the elevator pitch on it was, what if we did a limited run of Canadian edition rifles that were, you know, not a huge change from what you find off the shelf, but a little bit different, right? That's something interesting and specifically made for the Canadian market that does some of that kind of stuff. So we'll see. I'm hoping that they'll be ready in time.
That sounds like it'd be pretty cool. I'd like to see what those end up looking like when you get a hold of them.
Yeah, yeah, I'll shoot you a photo. I'm really enjoying my photography at the moment, so
That's good. I enjoy that you're multidisciplinary with the whole journalism thing. That you do the photos, you do video. Like it sounds very well rounded. So we'll see what those
oh,
photos look like when you get them up.
thank you, thank you.
Do you want to talk a little bit about one of the stories you broke recently with the Type 81?
Yeah, yeah, let's get into that. So, I mean, the big thing that happened, I guess we're talking almost 2 weeks ago now, at the sort of start of February. Um, I have a couple of people who I use as sources, right? So in the past, I've had people send me RCMP reports, as far as sometimes public reports, sometimes internal reports, that kind of thing. And I also have a couple of people who uh, have a vested interest in the FRT database. So they're either involved professionally, or they've got access to it because they're a verifier or a business operator, and they've got uh, a bunch of guns that are pending, right? Because there are tons of guns that are pending with the FRT lab, right? They've been submitted and they're being inspected, and who knows when they may or may not be released. So I got a heads up, and let me call up the actual date here so that I get it right. But essentially, they said, "Hey, just so you know, the FRT has been published for the Type 81," and that was February 4th. Um, and the Type 81 is a Chinese-made 7.62 by 39 rifle that feeds from an AK magazine, but uses a very SKS-like bolt. It's a really interesting gun. And it had been in Canada before. There was an entry from the mid 2000s that listed it as a Kalashnikov variant. Um,
Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to get into specifically around this. So you said it was originally listed as a Kalashnikov variant. It feeds from an AK mag. It runs what everybody thinks of as the AK round, 7.62 by 39, right?
mhm, mhm.
Dimensionally, it meets the criteria of being non-restricted. It's semi-automatic. It's got a 17.5-inch barrel, and it's almost 38 inches long,
Yeah,
right?
so the sample the RCMP looked at is actually a restricted model, right?
Okay.
Because that's just what the Chinese ship them with, is a 17.5 inch. So they need an extra inch onto the barrel. So either you get new barrels made, or you buy the light machine gun variant. And the LMG variant, I believe, is a 20-inch barrel. Um, but the big thing, right, was that they classified it as not a Kalashnikov. Um, and so Tactical Imports had submitted a new Type 81, and I'm going to say that was at least 3 or 4 years ago, probably closer to three, I think. Um, and sort of we're hoping to get the RCMP to look more closely at it. Because one of the things that I didn't initially understand is that the RCMP didn't always inspect every firearm that they issued an FRT to. In the 90s and the early 2000s, lots of stuff was just assigned, right? They would just accept paperwork and some blueprints and say, okay, good enough. And even today, um, if I if I bring in a new brand of AR-15, right, I get some new lower from an American manufacturer that nobody's ever heard of before. When I bring that in, I don't have to send that lower over to Miramichi to be inspected, right? I just register it through a verifier, and they say, well, it's an AR-15 lower. It's pretty clear what this gun is, right? So there are lots of times where the RCMP doesn't have to look at a rifle. In the case of the Type 81, I don't think they looked at it when they initially classified it. I think they were going down a list and said, okay, there we go. There's a Type 81. Yeah, it's an AK. And then somebody sent them one and said, are you sure? You should take a closer look at this, because this really isn't an AK, depending on how you term the word variant, right? And that's the huge issue with our law, is what is a variant?
Yeah,
Um,
I hadn't really thought about that because I mean, I never thought of the example that you just gave with the AR-15 lower because to me an AR is an AR is an AR. Who made the lower doesn't matter because the technical data package doesn't change from one vendor to another, right?
but it does change in the registry, right? The
Right.
registry cares who makes something. Yeah.
Well, it does, and that's how the FRT, the firearms reference table number, gets generated. I'd never thought about that though, because you're right. I assumed that every new gun that comes into the country, a sample goes to the RCMP lab and a firearms technician looks at it and goes, yeah, looks like a rifle.
No,
But
lots of them don't. I mean, and I can't speak for what it's like now, but I know that in the past they didn't always. That it was often enough just to get some basic marketing material, be able to look at it and pass a judgment. Um, and particularly, I mean, if it's some new version of a Mauser action, right? There's really no point in an
yeah,
RCMP tech taking the time to look at it.
yeah, and I
So,
guess I'm thinking about like common guns like that. I can see why they wouldn't go through the hassle of, okay, yeah, it's another Mauser, it's
mhm,
another AR-15, it's another 1911, right? Like it's something that everybody knows what anybody in firearms knows what it is.
exactly. And there's no question. It's when there's question, right? When there's some debate over lineage or legality, then they really need to sit down and take a look at it.
So we've been waiting for a couple of years. They've looked at this. Um, I was looking at the Type 81. I'm not sure if this is like the AK-47 Light or the SKS on steroids.
Yeah, it's sort of in between. So the historical origin of this thing is, I guess, uh, in the 60s and 70s, the Chinese weren't getting great results out of their Type 56 AKs. They didn't like the accuracy, and they wanted something that was more accurate. So they set out to build this Type 81 as, a general issue assault rifle that would improve the accuracy over the AK. Um, I don't know whether or not they really achieved that because there isn't a lot of statistics out there comparing the two. Um, but I do know that it was used. The Type 81 saw frontline service during the Third Indochina War, which is where China was involved with the North Vietnamese. Um, and the irony there is that the Chinese infantry units were using the Type 81, and the North Vietnamese infantry units were using Chinese-made Type 56s.
All
Um,
right.
and apparently, depending on what historical document you read, there was some desirability back and forth over capturing one or the other that was believed to be more reliable or more accurate.
I'd be curious to see what the reliability on these actually ends up being like, because it's a short stroke gas piston rotating bolt, right? So it's basically an SKS,
Hmm.
right? Like it's the operating system is closer to the SKS than it is to an AK.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Internally, it's much closer to an SKS.
Now, do you know, are these going to be like, are they stamped or milled receivers? I couldn't tell from the photo I looked at.
I don't know, and I'm not certain that we necessarily know yet, if that makes sense. I suspect that the version that was submitted to the RCMP was a milled receiver. But one of the other things that I've just started learning while covering the Type 81 is some of the differences with the way firearms come out of China. So right now, the RCMP have inspected and issued an FRT for a Polytech Type 81. In the FRT lab, there is still a Norinco Type 81.
Okay,
Um,
so the major difference being the factory that it came out of then, because Norinco and
yes,
Polytech are both state-owned
Norinco,
manufacturers, right? They're the
Norinco
same.
and Polytech were both explained to me as being state-owned exporters. So
Hmm.
they might pull from the same factory, they might pull from different factories. And see, for me, like for years I assumed they were the same, especially talking to the Americans about the M305, right? They in the United States, Norinco and Polytech are treated as a hybrid company, one and the same, and they're not. They are separate companies. Um, so in Canada, the way that I understand it right now is that we will see Polytech Type 81s coming in to tactical imports, and that we might see Norinco Type 81s coming into Canada Ammo. And I suspect that there are probably a few other companies with connections to mainland China that are looking for importers and manufacturers that could produce another version of this rifle. Um,
That would certainly be interesting to see because yeah, my understanding is kind of similar to what yours is that they're almost the same, but they're not quite.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we'll see a couple of different variants. The rumor that I hear third hand is that Canada Ammo knows somebody or has a connection to the plant that produces the light machine gun version of the Type 81. Um, so that would be a factory non-restricted barrel out of the box, and they would be able to just print those on a proper semi-auto receiver and ship them over here. Um, we'll
That
see.
starts to get pretty cool because
Yeah,
that's pretty close to the AK that I want. I mean, it's not the AK I want, but it's pretty close.
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's interesting. We have all these rifles in Canada that um, some people will definitely argue are superior to the AK or inferior if you're trying to dress up an SKS, but really everybody's trying to get back to that Kalashnikov thing. Um, as far as, you build your VZ58 into an AK lookalike or something close to, or you take your Type 81, and I guarantee you, if I had a Type 81, I'd be trying to make as much AK furniture fit as I could.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah. The AK is one of those, like, it's like an FNFAL. I don't like them, but I want to shoot them.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. And particularly the fact that you can't have it. My editor at Outdoor Hub, um, he and I met because he was a Tavor shooter, but if you look in his safe, everything he owns is Kalashnikovs, and he buys all kinds of because they're a U.S. company. He buys AK-74s, he buys the 7.62 by 54 versions, the Wassers. He buys little AKM clones, Krink clones, and they look great. And there's lots of them he says he owns and he never shoots because they don't shoot very well, but they're fun to have as a rifle. They have a real style appeal.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it's an iconic firearm, right? Like anyone that's seen a Hollywood movie knows what an AK-47 looks like.
Yeah.
And I mean, as the Canadian firearms owners, I mean, not having AKs and having other things that are close to AKs, the SKS, the VZ58, like we're so
It's
close to having that AK. It's disappointing that we don't actually have the AK.
Well, and we got to make do with what we got. And at least, I mean, it's interesting because I also know a lot of American guys who will tell you, well, the VZ is a better rifle anyways. It's way better. And
I
yeah,
don't,
but it's not an AK.
but it's not an AK. That's right. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I like my VZ58. It's my prop gun tonight on my board. Is one of my guns is my VZ58. I
Nice.
like my VZ58. It's good. I like having bolt hold opens.
Yeah.
Modern technology, the pinnacle of 1958 engineering, putting that bolt hold open, like, wow, 50-year-old tech is great, but it's still not an AK.
Well, and that is something significant about the Type 81 is that the Type 81 does have a last round bolt hold open, which is sort of exciting, but it only works with Type 81 magazines. So the idea is that it's compatible with an AK magazine. You can buy your Magpul AKP mag and put that in there, but you will lose the last round bolt hold open feature from it when you put it into a Type 81. But
That's kind of interesting. I'm surprised that they went to the effort of manufacturing a specific mag.
yeah, yeah, me too. And in fact, if you look, there's a grand total of two or three Type 81s in the United States that were imported as prototypes before the Clinton ban on Chinese-made weapons kicked in. And Alex at the Firearm blog got to take one apart. Um, and one of the things he mentions, it's a 5.56 Type 81, and there are no magazines in existence for it because for some reason the magazines were either lost or not imported with the rifle, and the rifle never went into full production because the Clinton ban kicked in. So he's got this gun and he's trying to retrofit like Romanian mags onto it to like file them down in certain ways and make them fit. It's very odd. Um, and I mean, in terms of United States commercial value, that particular rifle is essentially priceless because there's nothing else out there in the country. And there is uh, that level of satisfaction for me, at least, is well, that's true. We don't get AKs, but we do get to actually own the Type 81 where the Americans can't. And we do get to buy Norinco handguns, and we get the Puma bullpup shotgun, and we get real German HK guns. There's lots of stuff the Americans don't get either.
Well, yeah, I mean the whole 92R thing, right? It has to have so many American-made components.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's pretty cool. I'd really like to see the Type 81 when they get up here, whether it's through Can-Am or whether it's through Tactical Imports or somebody else altogether. I mean, I'd like to get a hold of one and play with one because, I mean, I've never been like an SKS guy. I've never really been a Milsurp guy either.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I got into the firearms thing to do competitive shooting, and as soon as I discovered there was other stuff to shoot competitively aside from trap,
Yeah.
like, well, I'm going to shoot ARs and handguns because those are the most fun, right?
Absolutely. And you can take an SKS onto a 3-gun range, but you are not going to be as competitive
No,
as.
and it's not nearly as competitive, and I've never really loved the 7.6239 round. But you know what? The way that the dollar is and the price of ammo and the fact that I picked up the VZ58 when we had a change in government and I wanted a non-restricted detachable mag-fed semi-automatic rifle,
Yeah.
just in case. It's like,
Well,
like this is the best thing. This is the closest I can get to an AK and still be legal. This is what I'm going to do. And now I've discovered I can shoot it for 20 cents a round. It's like, okay, I can't load 5.56 for that cheap. I'm going to shoot it.
well, and that's the thing. I mean, you look at absolutely 7.62 by 39, maybe not a great ballistic round, but in terms of just volume, it's unbeatable in Canada, at least right now. And unfortunately, the price has come up from where it used to be. And I hope that we find more ammunition importing options in the future for stuff like that, because I think military surplus ammunition really can totally change the market. I mean, you look in the United States, 5.45 by 39 AKs are very popular. And the only reason that those guns are popular is because ammunition for them is also cheap, right? Now
Well,
in
for the
Canada,
time being, yeah.
yes, yeah. But in fact, they did put a ban on it. I see. I'm very bad at following the American legal side of things because they do have lots of stuff that they get up in arms about, and things change pretty quickly down there, it seems, as far as
Oh,
some
for sure.
ATF rulings around stocks or shouldering or pistols or ammunition that is or isn't armor piercing. I mean, my whole thing is,
Yeah, I mean, the American laws are so convoluted, and the differences between various state and federal law, like
oh yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
thesis unto itself trying to keep track of stuff there.
And I'm in the industry. I can't get angry about everything that's a stupid law because there's so many of them. And if I was invested enough to be angry about every stupid law, I would be angry all the time, and I can't handle that.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate it. The more that I become involved, I'm not going to say in the industry, but in the shooting sports, because I'm not in the
Sure.
industry. I'm standing at the side of the door looking in.
That's the best place to be sometimes, for sure.
Well, you get all the cool side conversations.
Hmm.
So, I mean, like, the more I stand around and look at what's going on in the shooting sports in North America and the rest of the world for that matter, the more I see what's going on, the more I kind of shake my head and I just have to accept what it is. Because like, the American stuff, at one point, our gun laws drove me nuts. And it's like, I can't be annoyed every time our politicians do something dumb. And I can't stay on top of all the American, because I stopped paying attention to American gun laws about the same time that they stopped importing 5.45 ammo from the Russians.
Right.
It's just I can't keep on top of all your stuff and my stuff and everything. I'll just stand over here, and if something important happens, somebody will tell me.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is we are in an information overload age, and there's lots going on. Um, and sometimes those things change out from under you, right? That you get this shift from one thing that was in a pretty stable and officiated way uh, can go backwards, and which we saw with the Swiss Arms reclassification, and we also saw with the 1919 reclassification.
Well, okay, since you bring it up, let's jump into those. You were pretty involved in the Swiss Arms stuff, right?
Yeah, so when that started happening, um, I had a couple of people talk to me about what was going on, and a couple of people start sending me copies of emails that they'd received that were RCMP emails. And then I called and talked to Bill Etter, who's the senior firearms technologist there for a little bit. So yeah, I definitely covered that as it sort of came out that A, they were in peril, and B, that there were things that might be able to be done about it, and that kind of thing. I was very involved through that portion of it. And I kind of intentionally stepped back when we got into Bill C-42 and how much, because that got some really good coverage. That got great coverage across the board from a lot of people who were going through each change in wording from drafts on C-42 and that kind of thing. Um, it's funny because I didn't own a Swiss Arms. I still don't. And I did own an 858, and it was an 858 that was registered to me when the registry came down. But I sold it way before the prohibition kicked in. So I didn't have any skin in the game at that point. But I also knew in the back of my head that in whoever has the last version of the registry, my name's on there with a Prohib CZ858. For sure it is.
No, the government would destroy that. They would never keep a copy of the registry.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it became useless data as soon as it changed, but no, there's no way that that kind of thing just disappears overnight. I understand the legal and the forward side of it looks very good if we say we destroyed that data and removed it. It's a good political move, but from a rational point, I just and not even from like a tinfoil, somebody would be plotting to keep it. I just can't imagine anybody giving up that kind of data. It's something that you spent millions of dollars building. You may as well retain it for what it is while you can, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you're right. The law says it's supposed to be destroyed, and now that the Quebec, what is it, Superior Court case is done,
Yes.
there's no reason to hold on to any of it.
Yeah.
And like as somebody that does IT as a profession, removing a database is not a big deal. Right click, unmount, delete is pretty easy to get rid of, right?
Yeah.
But it's also something that as an IT guy, I never really get rid of anything. I have copies of copies of copies of stuff for my entire career.
Oh yeah, backups are easy to make and
Right?
important to have for any kind of professional context, right? You want to make sure you have a couple of backups from different versions. Absolutely.
And that's yeah, I can't I'm with you. I can't I'm sure somebody went onto the production server and were like, okay, run one last backup and we'll just put that in my pocket. Okay, and
Yeah.
now unmount, delete, gone. Look, the server is empty, the database does not exist.
Yeah. And really I don't care. You know, I'm not going to get upset if somebody has a secret version of the registry. It sucks, but also it's no longer accurate. And
Yeah,
also
it yeah.
it's hopefully not in the hands of anybody who would use it in a political or otherwise way, right? It's not publicly accessible. So that's
I
what
would
counts in
hope
my book.
not. I
Yeah.
would hope not. I mean, if it was publicly accessible, it would have been leaked to somebody like you by now, I would think, for distribution. Somebody
Well,
would say, "Hey, we've got this. We've got a copy of it. It's on the internet, right?" Like
yeah,
somebody would put that on the
exactly.
what, right? Like there's, the Canadian WikiLeaks or whatever. Somebody would put it up if it was available.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, we did see a shift with the 1919 as well.
Yeah. Do you
Um,
want to talk about the 1919? So for the listeners that don't know, it's a Turkish made shotgun, right?
yeah. Um, so the 1919, despite the fact that it shares the name with the classic Browning machine gun, has nothing to do with it. It is a box-fed, semi-automatic, piston-driven shotgun. But the big thing is that it shares an oversized mechanism. Well, not mechanism, but furniture and controls with the AR-15. So it's stylized to look like an AR, and its mag release and bolt release and safety are all positioned like an AR. Um, and so I imported one of these from the United States 2 years ago to shoot three gun with,
Okay.
because I got really excited about three gun. It was a great time, love shooting it. But also I realized pretty quickly that my weakest skill set was loading a shotgun tube, right? Taking individual shells and getting them into the tube, right? I can't quad load. I cannot take 4 shells off a belt at a time and feed them in there. But what I can do is I can I can index a magazine, and I can get a magazine into a magwell pretty darn fast. Um, so I bought this shotgun sort of as a workaround, and also because I was going to be shooting in the United States, and I knew that I could unpin the 10-round magazines when I was shooting in the U.S. and have lots of fun with it there. Um, so when I imported it, it had already been classified, and it was listed as an AR-15 variant. And every once in a while, somebody would come up and be like, why is this an AR-15 variant? Because it doesn't have takedown pins. It doesn't have a buffer tube, and it doesn't have an AR trigger group or anything like that. And the argument that was always put forward was that, well, if the FRT lab took it and put an AR upper on it and just duct taped, forced it to stay there
Okay.
and pulled the trigger, they could get it to discharge one round. There's nowhere for the bolt carrier group to go, so it would probably destroy the gun when it did that. But the argument was you can put an AR upper on it and you can get one round downrange. That's enough. And for a long time, I bought into that and went, well, that sucks, but it's restricted, and I only play with it on ranges anyways because I'm shooting 3-gun with it. Um, and then something changed in December of 2015 when Odell Engineering brought in the Daria Mark 10. And so if you're not familiar with Odell, they do all the Colt Canada distribution right now. So the C7 and C8 civilian clones, those are all shipped through Odell. And so they've been pretty good about getting some pretty interesting guns out there. So they decided they were going to bring in these Darias. And the Daria, in the same way that we were talking about Norinco and Polytech, Turkey similarly has different factories and different exporters. And sometimes they're making the same gun and selling it under different names. And sometimes those guns are made in the same place and sometimes they're not. In fact, if you've bought a Winchester shotgun, no, Winchester? Weatherby, my mistake. If you've bought a Weatherby shotgun in the last probably 5 to 10 years, it's probably a Turkish-made shotgun. And it's probably made by Hatsan or someone like that, but they make it for Weatherby. In Canada, we get a lot of these Turkish guns from different places. So the Daria is using the same system as the 1919, except that it's even more of an AR because they've got it set up that it'll actually take an AR pistol grip and it's got a buffer tube on it and it'll take an AR stock. And when Odell brought theirs in and they sent their sample to the RCMP, it came back as non-restricted. And I sort of saw this happening in December and I was like, oh, wait, you're telling me that gun is non-restricted and my gun is restricted? This isn't even a variant issue here. They're exactly the same. Like to the point that I would assume that our mag tubes and bolts were probably sourced from the same manufacturer and our magazines are probably sourced from the same manufacturer. But I didn't want to draw attention to it at that time because in my mind, the obvious reaction then from the RCMP is, oh yeah, that's a really good point. We should probably restrict this Daria.
Yeah, that seems like something the RCMP would do.
There is, I mean, there is always that backside, right? If you want to push for something, right? And we saw this happen in Canada, and I'm not as familiar with this particular fiasco because it was sort of before my time as far as real involvement and attention. But Sten guns, you used to be able to buy semi-automatic 9mm Sten guns all over the place. And somewhere along the line, somebody was making their own and submitted them to the RCMP and said, well, if these are legal, then mine should be legal. And the RCMP turned around and banned them all. And you can't find any semi-auto Sten guns. And it was an issue with firing from an open bolt versus a closed bolt and conversion to fully auto fire and that kind of thing. But that happened because somebody pushed the lab. So there is a real cost benefit analysis to be made anytime you're like, well, I think we have a case to say they're wrong about this. If you make that case, you also have to be prepared for them to go the other direction on it. So I sat back on the 1919 and I said, we're not going to deal with it. I'm just going to shoot my gun at 3-gun and have a good time with it. And maybe I'll buy one of the Darias when they show up. Right at the same time, right at the start of February when they classified the Type 81, they reclassified the 1919. And I'd been checking the 1919 FRT on a pretty regular basis, probably once every week or 2 weeks, just to see if they were going to come around on their own, because I was hopeful. Um, and sure enough, they did. They said, okay, this isn't actually an AR-15 at all, um, and it is a non-restricted firearm. So now I've got another registry certificate that I get to destroy, and I can now take this thing out camping if I want to, right?
So I have a question with that,
Yeah.
because the RCMP always strikes me as a group of people that always seem like they're busy. Like the FRT numbers usually take years to get updated. Do you have any inkling what prompted them to decide to review the 1919?
So I'm unsure of the exact sequence of events here. I am guessing. I would guess that Odell, when they brought in the Daria, submitted it and got their result. And they specifically probably sent a sample, because I'm not certain that the original 1919, whether they sent a sample or not.
Right.
Um, and from what I understand, John Hipwell from Wolverine Supplies also brings in a version of the 1919. What's his called? Um, and I believe that he pushed the lab, because I know that John, right, was involved with the lab with various projects that he's done, like the CZ958, um, and that he has pushed them in the past to try to get them to come to a ruling, and he personally has definitely felt targeted a little bit by the RCMP in the past, as far as them not really liking his pot stirring kind of stuff.
For
Um,
sure.
so from what I understand right now, he did push them and say, you know what, if that's non-restricted, then this should be non-restricted. And the RCMP turned around and said, well, that's a really good point. I guess we'll do that. Um, so that's the narrative as I understand it.
No, that's a good thing for sure. I mean, I'm surprised at the RCMP's take on that, because they don't typically side on anything that would make a gun owner happy, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, so the shotgun that Wolverine brought in was the Alpha Arms 15SA, and it's identical. It's
Yeah, so
another
it's another
Turkish.
Turkish mag fed, yeah, same kind of thing.
Yeah, you look at the photographs and they look the exact same. Um,
I have that problem with a lot of Turkish guns, is they all sort of look the same to me.
Yeah, well, and there is a whole thing with subtle changes in furniture and subtle changes in bolts and different sequential model numbers. Like, it's definitely a very complicated market, and I certainly don't feel like I have a full understanding of it myself. But I've found that also Turkish shotguns are pretty good. I haven't had any Turkish shotguns that I'm really disappointed with. I'm usually surprised at the quality of fit and finish in them, rather than disappointed.
So I need to know, have you shot the Caltech shotgun then, to be able to compare to a North American made monstrosity?
Yes, yeah, I've shot. I, yeah, see, I love Caltech. I've been to a couple of their. I go to their booth every year. I've been to the bullpup shoot in Kentucky that they sponsor, um, and Caltech is kind of out there, right? Because they are all design and a little bit of manufacturing, um, and and their manufacturing sometimes is very nice and sometimes isn't very nice. And they've had issues um, with their shotgun and with some of their rifles in the past. Um, they're just they're so different, right? You know, like their whole process is dramatically different from Remington's process or
Oh
Smith
yeah,
and Wesson's
it's
process. Or
totally an R&D shop that also happens to build prototypes that are for sale.
yeah, that doesn't. Although, you know what? They are also one of the most prolific handgun manufacturers, and we don't see that in Canada because all their guns are carry guns, like they're little tiny 3-inch. But
Yes.
they did put out something like 35 or 40,000 guns in 2014. Like,
Yes, they do saturate the handgun market in the US. I'll give them
mhm,
that.
mhm.
Their
So
shotgun and rifle production, from what I understand, they have to retool every time they decide to build a new SKU.
yes,
They'll build
that's
10,000 of something and then 10,000 of something else.
Well, and they do sort of a build up. So I was talking to them about the RDB, which is their 223 bullpup, very, very similar to the Tavor. Well, that's unfair. It's not similar to the Tavor, but if you were at 500 yards, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between them.
Sure. Looks like a bullpup, right?
Yeah. Uh, and so they're in the middle. They've done 200 guns now, and they're in the middle of 1,000 gun production. And then they're hoping at the end of the year they're going to do a 5,000 gun production. So the issue for their public side is you get this small slow scaling. So you get maybe 200 people who buy them and have them, and everybody else who goes out to a shop is told they can't get them. And then you get 1,000, right? So they sort of get around a little bit. And then you get 5,000 months later. So you have this real trickle into the market. Whereas most, a conventional product launch, if you're doing it, Steve Jobs Apple iPhone style, you announce you have the thing, and then hopefully it's for sale in every single retailer within a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do that wind up, and then everybody can buy it. And just Kiltech isn't interested in doing that, and fair enough. They're a gun company. They're not Apple, but they do run into, I think, a lot of flack because of the way that they scale things and the way that they do production runs. I don't know that I have a better solution, but they definitely earn some of that. You can't find their guns. Their guns are too expensive on Gunbroker kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's totally a scaling production issue, but
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. We kind of talked about the Turkish shotguns. We talked about your Type 81. If it's all right with you, let's get into rapid fire. That's our feedback section. There's a bunch of YouTube comments and some questions for you.
Oh,
And we've
cool.
also got some stuff recorded in the show notes, like we do every week when people leave us comments.
Yeah, hit me with it.
Okay, so let's. Oh dear, I've scrolled past the YouTube comments. Let's start with Swampland Films. Um, he's got a couple of comments. He got his PAL a month after the register was taken down, which is cool because nothing was ever registered in his name. I would
Bonus.
like to know why it took him so long to get his gun license. But he does ask you specifically, speaking of 3-gun, can you ask Edward how hard how hard was it for him to get his Tavor into the USA? What are the rules and regulations around bringing an Israeli-made Tavor into the US? Is it
Yeah.
Tavor or Tavor?
So I used to call it a Tavor, and the first SHOT Show I ever went to, one of the Israeli guys gave me shit, and he said, "Listen, it is a Tavor. There's no Tavor here." I was like, "Oh, okay then."
Well, all right.
Lesson learned.
When the IDF guy tells you this is the way it is, I guess you
Yeah,
have to listen.
yeah, you listen up and take that to heart. And so I did have, because originally I thought that I would never be able to get my Tavor into the United States. And then when IWS launched their rifles, I thought, you know what, it's worth a shot. Um, so my first 3-gun down there, I started going through the ATF. And I will tell you, having worked with the ATF and with the RCMP, the ATF are amazing. I know
Oh yeah.
yeah.
So you're talking about the Form 6 process, right?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, you sign and fill out what's called a Form 6 NIA. You're a non-immigrant alien, and it just lists what guns you have, where they're coming from, and then what your reason is for being in the United States. So you have a hunting license or you have an invitation to a sports shooting event, um, and that's it. And the ATF, they're they answer the phone, they answer emails, they will update your paperwork based on an email. They'll accept photographs through email. Like and everything was like 2 hours turnaround. And I understand for the Americans, they represent, the federal bureaucracy, and they're coming for our guns. And maybe the NFA side of things, if you want a suppressor, is really slow. But for me, as a Canadian, used to dealing with the Canadian firearms program, where you're on hold for 40 minutes sometimes,
Oh,
like,
easily.
oh yeah, um, and just kills me, like some of the stuff. I was trying to confirm a buyer's PAL recently through the Canadian Firearms Program, um, and they wouldn't tell me whether they had a valid PAL, right? Because I had their name, I had the PAL number, I had their address, um, but I didn't have the expiry date.
Oh, well,
And so
naturally, that's yeah.
and they could, like, the person I was on the phone with looked and said, "Oh yeah, that's right. Yep, that guy's." Oh, but no, I cannot officially confirm that that PAL is legitimate until I have the expiry date from you. And I was like, "Oh, so you're looking at it. You can see his file. You can see he has a PAL." But that's the way it is, right? That's just, they are that kind of bureaucracy sometimes. And particularly, it's just somebody answering the phones. It's not like they have a lot of uh, drive and control about what they can and cannot give out.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but the ATF was very, very responsive. So in the case of the Tavor, um, my initial submission, they came back and they said, well, I think this is a machine gun, and you know that you can't import a machine gun to the United States, and especially if you're not a US citizen, you can't import a machine gun. And so I went back to them. I said, no, as a Canadian, I can't own anything full auto. Um, and the way that we broke it down, um, is that there are three models of Tavor. There is the SAR 21, and that's made by IWI US, and it's manufactured in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and it's available all over the place. There is the TAR 21, and that's manufactured in Israel, and there I believe TAR stands for Tavor Automatic Rifle. Um, and so the TAR 21 is a full auto machine gun. In Canada, what we buy, if you look at the receiver of your gun, it says Tavor 21. So what we have is a dedicated semi-automatic receiver with no full auto. So uh, pretty clear for us up here, not necessarily clear for the ATF. So I had to snap a bunch of photos, take it apart, show them the internals, and then they certified it, and they certified it as a separate kind of rifle.
That's
Like,
pretty cool to be able to do that by email and to be able to send pictures to an ATF, I assume, agent
yeah,
that
I
could
had a guy's
infer from the
name.
photos. Yeah.
Yeah. Like there was somebody assigned to my case who I could go to and be like, "Hey, Diego, can we take a look at this?" And he was great. Like it was a totally different experience.
Yeah. I mean, so the same thing. I've applied for a Form 6, and my experience with that has been fill out the serial numbers, fax it, find a fax machine.
Mm.
Finding the fax machine has honestly been the most difficult part of the process.
Yeah,
Wait,
welcome to
and
the
then get
21st
an email
century.
back to you as okay, you're approved. Bring your guns and ammo.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
so I mean, that's pretty cool that you can work with an ATF agent that understands firearms well enough. Because I mean, I've been on the phone with Miramichi and like, okay, so I've turned this AR receiver into an AR-15 now. It's actually a rifle. How many rounds does it hold?
Yeah, like, come on, guys.
It's an
Yeah,
AR-15. It holds 5.
yeah.
Are you sure it holds 5?
Pretty
Do
sure,
you want me to
guys.
recite the law to you? Like, I'm not sure what you're asking for. What are my two options on your flow chart?
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Like, yeah. But that's pretty cool. So you went through the process. It's a Devore 21, so it's not the SAR, it's not the TAR, it's its
mhm.
own thing, which I assume is now just part of the US system.
Yeah, so now they've got an extra entry in whatever the ATF's equivalent of their database is. Now they've got one that is a semi-auto internationally made, because there's no way that that gun is 922R compliant. But fortunately, that doesn't matter unless it's living in the United States. So if I tried to move there and permanently import it, then I might have issues. But because I'm making it very clear to them that I'm coming and I'm going and I'm taking all my guns home with me, then
Mhm.
they don't mind. Um, they're also pretty good at the border. Going across the border is not an issue for me. They usually want to see your event invitation, and twice I think I've had guys where they say, "Okay, come around, let's open the case and let's look at the guns." And um, I think they checked once that the serial numbers matched.
Okay,
But
yeah,
that,
that was my question. Is how much of that is a show and tell? Like these are just gun guys that want to see, and how much of it is
oh, they
like
were gun
border
guys.
secure? Yeah, see, that's been my experience with traveling or with people that I know that have traveled to the US. Is if anybody wants to see their guns, it's usually because they're gun people. Like they want to see it just because it's show and tell, not because they're like, oh yeah, let's make sure the serial numbers all match up on his form.
Yeah, no, they were curious. That was it.
Yeah.
So
That's pretty cool. So generally, it's a good experience for you. It wasn't a major pain in the butt to get stuff down there.
No, it was quite easy. It is something that I would do 8 months in advance or 4 months in advance. If I knew that I was going to be going down there, like I wouldn't be trying to do it and turn it around in a week,
Yeah,
just
no, I
because
think
there is that
that's
level.
fair.
Yeah.
Your Form 6 is good for 12 months, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so I mean, if anybody listening is thinking about going to the U.S. to shoot competitively or to go hunt there, I mean, it's probably best to apply and then just have the Form 6 for the year and then update it the next year.
Yeah, it costs you nothing but time, and it does last a good amount of time. And it's pretty easy. I think once they've approved you once, they sort of have you in the system, and it's been equally fast each time. So
That's pretty cool. Let's look at some of the other feedback. So Josh, I don't know, Gagne. I'm not sure if you're French or not. Wants an AK, has to buy 3 Type 81s. He has an AK that's a paperweight D Watt,
okay, yeah.
and was mentioning that Yugo mags may have followers that act as bolt hold opens, and I'd not heard of that. I thought all AKs did not have bolt hold opens, but
No, I have heard of this. Somebody, who was that now? Somebody who was in Afghanistan training the Afghan National Army was talking about a batch of AKs they had that had last round bolt hold opens. And they were Warsaw surplus, and that you had to keep them clean. And if they weren't kept clean, then the bolt hold open would start to fail again. It would go back to just being a regular AK. So there are versions of them on the market.
that's
Um,
pretty cool. I'd like to see some of those if they are Yugo AKs or if it's Yugo mags specifically or what the deal is. I'd
yeah,
definitely see those because I'm curious. I like how AKs work. I mean, I don't think it's one of those things that I'd ever work on here. Like I'm an AR guy. I think I'll stick to my ARs, but if we could get an AK, I'd like to look at one to see how it plays.
Yeah, I mean, why not if you could? And I'd be curious as to whether the Yugo bolt hold open works the same way that a Type 81 bolt hold open does, right? And whether those mags would allow you to get that bolt hold open back by putting them in there. I'm guarantee you that somebody is going to start taking apart their Magpul PMag that cost them $10 or whatever, and try to retrofit a bolt hold open that will work with the Type 81 onto that. That would be one of the first things I'd be doing.
Oh, I'm
Um,
sure. I mean, that'd be once you figure out the piece of engineering that works as the hold open, it wouldn't be hard to replicate it.
exactly.
So do we have any other feedback? I think I got one more from Swampland Films.
Yeah, go for it.
His mind was blown when the RCMP admitted to a mistake.
Yeah. I mean, there's two sides to this, and it's totally a personal opinion on how you feel about the RCMP and about large scale firearms policy. Because some people feel like it's always a targeting thing, and they're always on the side of trying to clamp down on gun owners. And for that perspective, this is a huge shift. This is crazy. This is something we've never heard of, and I've already seen lots of people who are uh, so cynical that they assume this means, oh, if they're doing this, it must be in preparation of an extended ban. It must be the next wave of banning that's coming, and I don't know. I find it's not implausible, but I also find I can't be that cynical about everything. What I do think is that uh, the RCMP firearms lab is a rule based setup, like anything else. So I am sure that the people in the room, when they realized that they were going to reclassify, something in the range of $20 million worth of Swiss Arms rifles, they probably said to themselves, I really wish we didn't have to do this. But the way that they interpreted those rules, and the way I interpret it, there's no doubt about the Swiss Arms being a variant of the SG 550. They're very, very clearly a 550 gas system on there. The argument in my mind is there's no way the Swiss Arms SG 550 should be listed on the prohib list. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
But
that's
if
yeah.
you interpret the letter of the law, right, They made a mistake 13 years ago now when they allowed the first Swiss Arms Classic Greens into the country. That was their mistake. And so when they discovered it, they had to correct it. Um, that's one perspective of it, right? Because you could just as easily frame that and say, oh, well, that's an RCMP apologist kind of thing to say. And, they should have used common sense. But the fact is, they're not paid to use common sense. They're paid to enforce a set of laws, and the set of laws have some very serious issues with them.
Yeah,
So,
I'd be more okay with this being in the hands of the RCMP bureaucracy machine if those laws were equally enforced across the entire spectrum of firearms in the country. If you
there is
said this
that.
is restricted and this is prohibited and everything else is non-restricted based on like the straight technical merits, like measurable, quantifiable, observable facts about a gun, the barrel length of the gun, the caliber the gun is in, the overall length of the gun, and you
Yeah,
just apply that equally to all guns, I'd be less venomously opposed to it than I am now.
there you go.
Because
Yeah.
when you start having things that are variants, well, then you have to deal with lineage. And is this a 550 or is it something else? Did it come out of the same factory that developed it? Does it look like it or is it actually it? Is the Type 81 an AK or is it an SKS? Well, it's not really either, but it's kind of both. Like,
Well, and the thing is, for every example we can show of one, there's the other, right? So if you look at are you familiar with the Blaze 47?
yes, it's
Yeah.
the 22 that looks like an AK if you put it in the AK furniture.
And it's nothing internally like an AK, even close. And even like, we say a VZ58 or a Type 81, at 300 yards, you might look at somebody and be like, oh, hey, I think that guy's got an AK. I'm pretty sure with a Blaze, if you were at 300 yards, you'd look and be like, I think that guy's got a toy. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, yeah. The dress up kits notwithstanding, like if you could look at something on its technical merits and the whole fact that we have this whole what's the word they use? It's not derivative.
variant.
Variant. Thank you.
Yeah.
The fact that we even have variants codified in law baffles me because, I mean, if you're going to separate things up based on the function of the firearm, okay, I don't like that full autos are prohibited, but I can understand what a full auto is, and it's quantifiable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And semi-autos are different. And okay, there's some overlap where maybe you have converted full autos that only operate as semis now, or maybe you have cases where you had a semi-auto that was machined into being able to operate in a fully automatic mode.
Right.
But you start to get into these quantifiable things, and then the RCMP leaves that, and they're like, yeah, it's a variant. Everything's a variant.
Yeah. It's a catch-all, right?
Yeah.
And it does. It's so generic that it's got lots of issues, right? It's that one size fits all when it definitely does not fit all.
Well, and then you end up with 12 gauge semi-auto shotguns that look like ARs being classified as derivatives, or not derivatives. Yeah. I'm using the wrong word again.
Variants.
As a variant of an AR-15. It's like, no, it doesn't use a direct impingement gas system. It doesn't feed from a Stenag mag. It doesn't actually have different uppers and lowers. It's not an AR. It looks kind of vaguely like an AR, but that's it.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
RCMP. Okay. Other feedback. We have YouTube comments on the, I don't know, the YouTube comment feed. I don't know how everybody else sees these. I see them in my comments feed as the creator, I think is what YouTube calls me.
Right. Right.
From Mr. Bean YouTube. Great show, guys. Got all the petitions signed, forwarded it off to all my friends at the gun club. So we want to thank him for that. And I saw there was a comment. I think he's watching live tonight. So we want to give a shout out to Mr. Bean YouTube. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for signing the petitions. Thank you especially for sharing them with your friends. Personally, I would really like to see that whole classify the AR-15 on its technical merits petition. I think it's E111. Don't quote me on that. Check the show notes. I'd like to see that hit like 3 million because there's 3 million gun owners. So why are we not all signing it? But hey, I'd settle for 20,000.
It's a good start, right?
Right. It's the leading. It was. I didn't check the stats today, but it was the leading petition on the government's petition e-petition website. So if we can make the current government recognize that as a voting bloc, the Canadian gun owners are not a group to be trifled with, not for the least of reasons being that we're heavily armed, that's not a bad thing. We've also got iTunes feedback. This is from Gavin, 5 out of 5. Gavin is one of our regular contributors on the panel. Gavin says, I suppose as one of the occasional co-hosts, I'm a little bit biased, but seriously, you should give us a listen. And if you give us a 5-star review, you can pick what I drink for an episode within reason.
That's a good setup.
It is a good. So next week, Gavin should be back on the show with me. Gavin will be drinking milk.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a little. I will still be drinking beer or some kind of alcohol because, but Gavin will be drinking milk. If you want to see Gavin drink something else, there was a whole Facebook discussion about, we'll call it excrement.
Oh.
Gavin is not drinking excrement on the show. If that's something he wants to do in his personal time, he can start a podcast for that.
That escalated quickly.
Oh, it was like somebody hit the nuclear option on the first post.
Yeah, here I am thinking like, oh yeah, get him a really girly Merlot or like force him to make an appletini or something.
Well, you see, that was my thing. I'm like, yeah, you should totally have a margarita. I'm going to leave a 5-star review just for that because I think it's funny. And I mean, he's already drunk wine on the show. I am not an English major. My degree is in computer science. I don't write for a living. So I mean, yeah, he had wine on the show. So I mean, the bar is already pretty low. I don't know if it was box wine, if it was actually a bottle of wine. I don't remember. It might have come in a bottle. He might be classy.
There you go.
It may have also come in a box because he's not. But yeah, I don't know who it was. Somebody on Facebook immediately went with, okay, you're drinking urine.
Wow.
So yeah, Bear Grylls is not a guest on the show, but if you want Gavin to drink something weird, leave a 5-star review on iTunes with what it is. Nobody gets to tell me what to drink. I'm an adult. I do what I want. I think that pretty well wraps up the rapid fire. So this is sort of the end of the show, Edward. Where is, and I've got a whole bunch of links in the show notes, where is the best place for people to find you?
Oh my God, you're right. I spread myself all over the internet. I just kind of smeared around.
Yeah, no, I understand. I have a list that I have to give out.
Really, the best place, the most central place, is my own blog, and that's TV-presspass.com. So on TVPressPass.com, I link to my YouTube, I link to my Twitter, I link to my Instagram, I link to my Facebook page. I usually have a couple of links pointing to the written stuff that I'm doing for the firearm blog and other online outlets. That's the big one right there.
All right, so we got links to that. I'll put up links to the Twitter, the Facebook, the YouTubes, just so everybody gets them in one spot. Do you want to talk a little bit about the blog, or I'm sorry, not blog, the podcast that you recently started with Kate? Because I listened to the first episode on that, and I'm looking forward to some more.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so Kate and I I buy ammo from her all the time. I'm always in there. We're always sitting down. We're always talking. And we were talking about a couple of things. We said, yeah, we should do a podcast. And we've been pitching that idea back and forth for ages. Spent a long time coming up with a name. The name we picked was Great Northern Firearms Radio. And we're sort of looking to do a compressed roundup kind of stuff. So we're pre-recording. We're not doing anything live. I'm not nearly as ballsy as you are. And our whole pitch is we want to do more shooting stories and a little bit of feature about what we're shooting or what we're playing with on a given week. I'm not anticipating to be as political. I feel like you've definitely got the political side of things covered, and Slamfire Radio's out there doing their thing too. And so we wanted to try podcasting because Kate's got a really good voice for radio, and she wants to do more than just sell ammunition. And I haven't done a whole lot of podcasting. This is one of my few. I've done a couple of guest things, but I kind of like tinkering around with audio and like the idea of it. So we'll see. We'll see whether I'm dedicated or disciplined enough to get a regular posting going there. But we had a good time with the first show, so hopefully we'll take it from there and try a few more.
No, I really enjoyed the first episode, and being that it was that 30-minute mark, that was because I realize that my show goes a little bit long sometimes. We've had a couple of episodes that have been twofers.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of episodes that should have been twofers, but I'm too lazy to edit out 2 intros and 2 outros for. So
Well, that's part of it. You get talking, you get interested, you get into whatever subject, right? And I think that's part of the really good naturalness of it. But yeah, it also means sometimes you're going to run a little long.
Yeah, no, I like the first episode. I didn't realize that Kate is British. I'm not sure. I can't place the
Oh, yeah.
accent. She is?
Oh, yeah. She's super. I mean, she's not super British because I've known some people who are very, wear the Union Jack pin kind of thing. But she, I'm going to get this wrong. She should really do her own bio. She came over to Canada in the mid 90s, something like that. And she is a Canadian citizen. She's married here. Her son's born here, all that kind of stuff. But
No, that's very
yeah,
cool.
she is originally British. Yeah.
It just messes with my worldview, so I'm going to have to go back and like reread Gun Nuts posts with a different accent in my head.
Right. Suddenly you hear the voice behind the text, and you have to reassess everything. I get it.
It definitely messed with my worldview a little bit, but you're right. She does, actually, both of you do for that matter, have that voice for radio, and that 30-minute show is a very easily digestible format, which I realize that Canadian Patriot Podcast is not, because it's hard for me to get into anything in 30 minutes. I can do my intro and outro and not much else.
Well, I'll get you there. You should just do a drinking podcast, 30-minute drinking podcast.
I could do that every day, but I might affect my profession a little bit.
Yeah, just a tad.
Just a tad. For our listeners, as always, my name is Andrew. You can find all my work on everydaytactical.com, where I review guns, gear, beer, anything I find tactical, or interesting. I think we're seeing a theme with the alcohol. Instagram at @edtactical. Again, pictures of dogs, guns, or beer. And Twitter. I don't Twitter. It's just I use it to post stuff that I've posted elsewhere. It's an aggregator. The point is, you can see pictures of beer there.
Perfect.
For the website for the show, you can reach us CanadianPatriotPodcast.com. Like us on Facebook. We're at like 170 likes. I'd really like to beat Tyler and the International Liberty or Death podcast. So if we could get up to that 200 likes, I'd really appreciate it. Facebook.com/Canadian Patriot Podcast. If you'd like to leave feedback for the show, you can do that through the website or email feedback@CanadianPatriotPodcast.com. We'd like to remind all of our listeners that you are the true North, strong and free.